We have 2 million objects in our collection. The Royal Navy and also Chat Over Chai have come together and chosen just 3 of those to put a wider historical context onto those objects.
The poster is actually part of a series of 6 propaganda posters produced by the Ministry of Information during World War II. Each of the posters represents a different country in the empire at that time. The one that we're looking at is by an artist called Dora Batty, who tended to produce artwork for the Tube, but she was called upon to produce the picture in this poster.
Well, when I first saw it in the museum, I thought, oh, great, there's something in this museum that is representing me, my colour.
Okay, when I first saw this picture in the museum, I don't know whether I would have given it much of a second glance, apart from thinking, oh, that's a really nice picture. It's obviously on a tea plantation, 2 lovely women posed beautifully, and then there are some words on it. Did I know that India supplied all the jute for making sacks and sandbags and other things that were needed for the war effort?
When I first looked at the poster, it was a little bit different for me as a former history teacher. I taught about propaganda, or I taught about the way that the British government had to ultimately sell a message to the British public. There's sometimes a misconception that the war was just all this blitz spirit of people backing the government and constantly volunteering to join the armed forces. But it wasn't always that way, and the British government had to work very hard to keep the public on side. So this poster for me is a clear demonstration of that. It's the British government telling the British public that most of our trade comes via the sea, and lots of things that you take for granted actually come from very far away and need to be protected. So the reason it's in the Royal Navy Museum is because that's the Navy's job, is to protect trade. But it's quite hard to switch off that critical mind. When I look at propaganda, it is ultimately, it's false information to tell a story and to convince people and to influence people.
It really does make me feel sad, actually. Initially, the more deeper we were looking at it, we realised that actually there were like anger. There's a lot of anger, frustration and sadness, really, because I don't feel like the true stories have been told. You hear about World War II and you hear of what countries help. You hear a lot about America, how it helped, but that poster is telling you actually a lot of the supplies came from India, but you don't really hear about this in history at all. You don't hear about it in the news. Children don't learn about it in schools.
লাগে একটা মডেলও লাগান কিন্তু আমরা তো ইলাকা পড়ে না আর আমার রাগুটে তারা আমরা যে সময় যত হার্ড ওয়ার্ক করে কিন্তু তারা আমাদের থেকে লিয়ে আইছে আর তারা মাসে আমরা রে হয় আমরা পড় আমরা যাই না back home.
We know that the poster is painting a very romanticised view of South Asian tea pickers. We know that their lives were hard, they were paid very little, and this really isn't represented in the interpretation of the poster at the moment.
We've decided to recreate a new poster because in the original poster you have women looking elongated, very happy, clean. They're doing this from their free will. But actually they would have been working very hard for very little money. On that trade, the tea trade, a lot of brutality happened really. So we would like to change that poster to show this is what happened.
And I think that's why it's important for projects like this to bring people together, to look at things like objects like the poster and to understand how propaganda works, because ultimately we're in a world filled with propaganda from different directions.
So what this project is doing is really enabling us to shine a light on the wider context of what's in museums, because they're displayed mostly from a white British context, and this is giving us an opportunity to look beyond that, to look much wider in honestly telling the stories behind something like that poster.